So I think you just hit the nail on the head. But like you said, it's I found it really profound watching James Baldwin debate maybe like 60 years ago, where basically the is on a talk show, and the guy, I can't remember who he was. It wasn't when he was talking to the arch conservative of Oxford. It was like mainstream TV here, and the guy was trying to say, no, basically there's a basic goodness in the white man's culture, and Baldwin was like, no, like, I can't, you say these things and you expect me to believe them and to buy into them and hope because of my better angels that they're going to be true. But I look and I see that, your labor unions are lily white. That,
Right.
with, as Malcolm X said, that the most segregated hour in America is high noon on Sunday. That that the violence that's incurred on my community is just an anomaly, and then you expect me to just drop this facade when all this
Right.
evidence is here in front of me. And what's been fascinating for me with that then is then you flip it on its head, and you notice how little structural support ostensibly people of color labor movements received. Like when the United Farm Workers, which was ostensibly Latinos and Filipinos, there was some support on the outside, but it wasn't like a major rallying cry within it. And we've seen this, that so many of our labor unions, and keep in mind, I'm trying to say this with all respect, in the same way of a loving critique earlier, of saying, like, I respect in the context of capitalism why folks are so protective of their unions. It's so hard to build that. And if we go back to Roediger's The Wages of Whiteness, think about if folks had tried to give up their whiteness, not be so invested in their whiteness, how much stronger our labor unions would be. And actually Cesar Chavez,
Absolutely.
really instructive along those lines, because and this pisses me off to no end, you have the selective reading of history, where the conservative right is constantly saying, well, why are you liberals loving Cesar Chavez? Or no, how do they say it? I can't even pronounce Cesar Chavez. Why do you
I was gonna say, there's no way they say it right.
no, that's why it took me a moment. Like, and so, why do you love him so much? He hated illegal immigrants. And that's true to an extent. It's sort of like if you look at early Malcolm X, all white people are blue-eyed devils.
Yeah.
And then you see an evolution. Chavez went through a similar evolution where he said, no, our union has, like, these people are only scabs meant to undercut our union. And then he evolved and said, wait, they're integral. We need to bring them in instead of kick them out. And I think it's easier for him to have that kind of an awakening relative to a lot of our more mainstream unions, because because they've had the intersection of race and class together more apparently. But I will say one thing that I appreciated so much was that the union that Garcia, there's so many people who are hurt.
Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
There you go. And, that his trade union,
the United Auto Workers,
they even said, our brother is in arms and it has been taken from us, and he's in El Salvador, and we demand him back.
Absolutely.
I don't imagine 60 years ago that trade union president would have said that same thing. And so it's not enough, but I love the progress that we're making in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a history of, and so for the viewers who might not know, I want to provide a brief. And I'm gonna try to keep it brief. If you know me, I get to getting on, and then before I look up, it'll be 40 minutes later. But I know we got a hard stop, and I want to talk about so much. But the thing you need to understand about what we're talking about, the undergirding here, is that when race was created, and I mean that quite literally, when the category of whiteness was created, it was in response to what we would now call a multiracial rebellion in Virginia, where working people, enslaved Africans, indentured Europeans, were like, hey, we're getting the short end of the stick. This is a raw deal. Landowning elitists like William Berkeley, yes, who the college is named after and all that, and England is not doing is not promising us what we said we were promised. So they busted Virginia's ass and Berkeley's ass for a whole year, gave it to them. They had to send the armada and everything, and they end up putting that rebellion down. It's called Bacon's Rebellion. I won't get into how history talks about them dishonestly, that event, because they never talk about the most important thing that happens from it, which is the creation of race. It's the idea, it's the recognition that, hey, these working people who have common cause, who share, are living a common experience, and don't like us, right? Who we are oppressing, who we are exploiting. If they get together, there's way more of them than there are of us, and it's problems. And so that was where race, whiteness particularly, gets entered into the conversation. We see anti-miscegenation laws start to ban what we would now call interracial marriage. Really, it's just marriage between white people and anybody else. They didn't care if like an African and a native person married. They didn't care about none of that. Exactly. And that was key then to the mainstream economy, right? It was that. And then we see, and Nolan brought up Rodigger's work in working towards whiteness. He talks about European ethnic groups being a sort of in between, right? Labor, they're getting exploited and they're demanding changes. And labor unions were often the vehicle that they did. And unfortunately, not enough labor unions did embrace a multiracial ethic, did embrace a sort of what I would call a class consciousness, truly a class consciousness.
Yeah, exactly.
Where they say, hey, our material interests are aligned with people, these other groups of people, which is why I love, and my man wasn't perfect, and this organization isn't perfect, so this is a huge caveat, but the Wobblies and the IWW and Eugene Debs they refused to segregate. They were they were a multiracial union. You have folks like Miles Horton who refused to segregate Highlander, right? It was a space where folks could come together. And so we're seeing some of that, right? When like you talked about with the labor union president demanding that Kilmar Abrego Garcia be returned. But that brings us to the next thing I want to hear your thoughts on, brother, is there's always this need for labor in a capitalist economy, right? You have to have a labor force. You have to have a proletariat, as Marx would call it. And historically, people who look like me, Europeans, have used their labor to increase their cultural capital, the wages of whiteness, as Du Bois would call it, right? And we're seeing that move farther. That's becoming a thing in the past, especially as industry has left, right? And so now there's conflict where white folks aren't able to do that, right? And more they're trying to say, hey, but wait, what's special about what do we get? There's increasingly less of the pie. So what do we get based on our whiteness?
Exactly.
Which is opening them up for this anti-immigrant rhetoric, right? Which is why people can say, oh, I hate Trump, but he won on immigration, right? And even there were Latinx people, there were black folks, there were immigrant communities who were like, oh, he's not, they believed him when he said they're not talking about us. But they really are, right? And so how do